There'd already been a ramping up of rhetoric, as you'd expect, ahead of these midterm elections. If you watch American television at the moment or even use social media, regardless of where you are in this country, there will be a cavalcade of political advertising, and much of it is very personal, accusatory in tone and angry, threatening violence against candidates, inciting racial hatred in cases. But it is difficult to escape the role the president may have played in all of this. One of his own supporters in Texas this week told me he's nasty, and that's why a lot of people like him. At the rally I went to earlier this month in Iowa, he ran through his usual list of targets, including naming and mocking individual Democrats, Maxine Waters, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, among others. He also runs through a list that includes Dianne Feinstein, for example, and Richard Blumenthal. Now, he gets lots of laughs, but he's also demeaning and personally attacking them, using the White House as a launch pad. And as a member of the media at his rallies, it is very standard, really, for him to provoke chants against journalists in the room as we do our jobs, and he accuses us of fake news. CNN is always a particular target, and a target that the audience responds to very enthusiastically. So it's from that standpoint that he is now attempting to call for unity. And at his rally last night, he looked for someone else to blame, a familiar target, again the media, who he accuses of enabling hatred through our inaccurate reporting. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, has this.
In the early hours, police were called to the film star Robert De Niro's Manhattan restaurant, where a suspected parcel bomb had been found. It was removed by a secure vehicle. De Niro is well known for his liberal views, and he's echoed President Trump's at times violent language.
He talks how he wants to punch people in the face. Well, I'd like to punch him in the face.
Two suspect devices addressed to former Vice President Joe Biden were found at a post office in Delaware. So far, the bombs, all of which were sent to Democrats, have been apprehended and defused, and none has caused any injury. Before today's suspicious packages addressed to De Niro and Biden, parcels containing pipe bombs were sent to the homes of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, amongst others, including Obama's former Attorney General Eric Holder and Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Another was addressed to the former CIA Director John Brennan at CNN, where he's often a guest, and one to the billionaire philanthropist George Soros.
Donald J. Trump.
At a rally in Wisconsin last night, the president was trying to sound presidential.
No nation can succeed that tolerates violence or the threat of violence as a method of political intimidation, coercion, or control. We all know that.
He was slightly surprised at his own restraint.
And by the way, do you see how nice I'm behaving tonight? This is like, have you ever seen this?
And although CNN had just been sent a pipe bomb, was soon back to his customary rhetoric against journalists.
The media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories. Have to do it.
That was mild compared to Monday in Houston, when he encouraged his adoring supporters to chant, "CNN sucks."
Don't worry, I don't like him either, okay?
And he roused the old cry against his defeated opponent Hillary Clinton, "Lock her up." This was the bomb addressed to the former CIA director. With investigations still underway, there's no direct link to presidential rhetoric. But today, the mayor of New York did make a connection.
We've got to stop talking about Donald Trump all the time. There's other things going on in our society besides the president. The hatred that's out there has existed in this country for a long time. He has given it license. He has given it permission. He has made it easier for those voices of hate to come forward. That is a fact.
Police cordoned off De Niro's New York restaurant through the day. The FBI said this evening that they were focusing on leads in Florida and that all 10 parcel bombs had gone via the US Postal Service. Words may have consequences, but with bitter midterm elections in 12 days' time, it's unlikely that US politicians will tone down their language.
Well, I'm joined now from Philadelphia by James Maxwell. He's a former FBI bomb technician and investigator, and he was involved in several high-profile investigations, including the hunt for the 2013 Boston Marathon bomber. Mr. Maxwell, thank you for joining us. I know you're familiar with these kinds of inquiries. Given the explosive devices, how viable do you think they were?
Well, that remains to be seen. What's unusual about this case is that you have a large amount of supposedly explosive devices, but nothing was initiated. And that's fortunate. I'm glad that nothing did go off. But it's going to be incumbent upon the laboratory, once these devices are analyzed, to determine whether or not they're a functional device. Because to go into a courtroom and say this man had a bomb, there's certain criteria that has to be met. And it's incumbent upon the government to prove that this was a dangerous device. And that hasn't been established yet. And right now we're at the beginning stages of trying to analyze and determine whether or not these devices are in fact bombs. They look like bombs, but none of them have functioned yet. And the laboratory is going to have to determine whether or not the design of this device could function.
And from what you're hearing about the investigation, is it likely to be a group or an individual that's responsible?
Well, again, the investigation, we'll have to see where it takes us. A timeline has to be built here on when these devices were introduced into the public sector. In other words, were they mailed through the U.S. mail? When were they mailed? Were they given to private couriers? When were they given, and we have to determine if there's any records that reflect who may be at the start of that timeline. That will tell us a lot, whether or not there's one individual involved or several individuals involved. But we're dealing with devices that have been spread all over the country, from California to the East Coast and Florida. So I think it's highly likely that there's more than one person involved here, although it hasn't been proven yet. And I would like to just correct you for a moment there. I did not work the Boston Marathon bombing. That was after I retired.
Apologies that we were misinformed. Just quickly, clearly these are targeted at critics of President Trump. Does that tell us something about the profile of the person or the types of people the FBI is currently looking for?
Sure. There's a growing list, and I am not going to be surprised if we see several more prominent Democrats targeted here. They've gone so far as to send 10 devices out. A few more is not going to make a difference. I believe that they're trying to make a statement here in targeting these individuals. But the actual motive of the individuals sending these devices, we're not going to know that until we actually identify that individual.
James Maxwell. Sorry to interrupt you. That's all we have time for. James Maxwell, thank you so much.
Sure.
Matt.
Thanks, Fatima. Well, with crucial midterm elections in the USA just weeks away, how should the Republican Party react to these pipe bombs? I'm now joined from Washington, D.C. by the Republican strategist, Deanna Bass-Williams. Thanks for coming on the program. Do you think the president bears some responsibility for these attacks in the sense that he upped the ante against the journalists at the very beginning of his election campaign in 2016?
I don't believe that we can blame one community, whether it's the left or right, for the divisive nature of politics in the U.S. right now. I definitely believe that the president has some very strong rhetoric, and as a Republican most of my life, all of my adult life, I would like for him to tone down the rhetoric. But I do believe, and this sometimes is uncomfortable for people to hear, but I do believe that the media has a responsibility to bear in terms of amping up the tension. The media in the U.S., as your correspondent pointed out, when you turn on the television in America, the only thing that you get if you're watching the news is negative news. Everything that the president does, according to the main three largest news outlets, 90% of their coverage is negative. And so we're to believe that everything...
I mean, it's very... it
does, and that's why I said the top three.
Sorry to interrupt. The media landscape is incredibly tribal in America, as is politics. Does that not make it incumbent on the commander-in-chief, the president of all Americans, not to lower himself to the level where he uses journalists like Christians in the Colosseum to whip up a crowd at a rally?
I do not support the president's rhetoric towards the media. You know, there was a time in my life when I was on the other side of this career, and I was a journalist as well. And so I think that people who go into journalism, people who are journalists, who are honest and sincere, I think that it's it is the last stand in a democracy, a free and fair press. But it is a free and fair press, and I do not believe that the president always receives fair coverage. Now, that being said, that does not give the president the leeway or the right to be as divisive as he is. But we also have to remember that it takes two to tango, and there on the left we have had members of Congress like Maxine Waters ginning their base up to go attack people in restaurants, at gasoline stations, and so it's very divisive, and it does need to stop.
Yes, sorry, but I mean, on the other hand, I was in America during Barack Obama's time. He was attacked by the right-wing media, by Fox News, in incredibly vitriolic ways, and he never stooped to the level of attacking journalists per se, nor Bill Clinton, by the way, who's received some very vitriolic press. And even under George W. Bush, who was also attacked by the left, he never stooped to that level. So this is a new reality that we're in, isn't it?
I would say that, and I think that if we really analyze it, I agree that these other gentlemen that you have mentioned, our presidents, have not responded the way President Trump has responded. But I would also say that they have not received 90% negative coverage in the way that President Trump has. If you watched American news, you would imagine that this country is going to hell in a handbasket, and that we're not that our economy is not booming, and it is, that we have not had successes in expanding opportunities to low-income communities, which we have. You would imagine, if you watch the main, and you're right, it is tribal. We do have some networks that think that the president does no wrong, and then we have networks that thinks that he only does wrong. Right. And as an American news consumer, you have to literally watch 15 outlets before you get a little bit of the truth. So we do need to have a more responsible way of reporting the news.
You're absolutely right, and there simply aren't enough hours in the day to watch that much TV. Diana Bass-Williams, thank you very much indeed.